People with curly hair have found themselves searching for representation in movies, TV shows, commercials, magazines, and more, and always come up short. In the last 100 years, curly hair has largely been depicted in a negative light. Unprofessional, beastly, space-consuming, and flat-out ugly are just a few ways curls are depicted. Whether a person's hair is curly or straight seems to show a lot about characters in movies, even without a true introduction. For example, in the movie Brave, Merida is taught to hide her curls to act more princess-like, but opts to let her wild, messy mane loose to show her tomboyish, rule-breaking side. Her mother, the Queen, asks Merida to hide her curls for big events in an effort to look more refined, but Merida gets frustrated by this request and pulls her hair out of its covering. She continues to defy her mother when she shoots her own arrow in a competition for her hand in marriage, proving her desire to get away from the pressure of the royal world. Hermione Granger of the Harry Potter series is also described as having a tangle of bushy curls, and is constantly made fun of until the Yule Ball, when she uses a hair smoothing potion to tame her curls, and everyone begins to realize for the first time how beautiful she is. Her hair is one of the few reasons that people did not think this earlier. Perhaps the most famous and impactful example, however, is Mia Thermopolis' princess transformation from the iconic film The Princess Diaries. When Mia learns that she's a real-life princess, she immediately undergoes a physical makeover to look the part. What part of pre-Princess Mia gets transformed first? Her curly, bushy, frizzy hair. It is instantly smoothed and straightened to make her look more beautiful and refined. TV shows similarly represent characters' traits by way of their hair. In My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, Pinkie Pie, the only main character with curly hair is the bubbly, almost too energetic character. Her hair is meant to portray that. When she gets sad, her hair turns straight, and her personality becomes bland and dull immediately.
I hadn't noticed. That's not good.
In the iconic sitcom The Office, Pam starts out as the lovable and naive receptionist. At this point in the show, her hair is always in natural wavy curls. From season 1 to season 5, her hair stays this way. However, in episode 3 of season 6, Pam gets promoted and begins selling paper along with her office mates. From this point forward, her hair progressively becomes straighter and straighter until the show's conclusion in season 9.
We still surprise each other.
Definitely.
In Sex and the City, Sarah Jessica Parker's character Carrie Bradshaw flaunts SJP's own natural waves for much of the show. Her hair is not artificially smoothed or straightened. At the time of the show's airing, Carrie is seen as somewhat of a radical for flaunting these curls and still being a model of sophistication. By season 5, though, her natural curls are shown much less often and are replaced with either iron curls or straight hair entirely. This correlates with her emerging from a breakup and starting a new freelance job at Vogue.
I had a new due, a new mortgage, and therefore a new job.
Curly-haired millennials and members of Gen Z grew up on content that was not catered to us. Even subconsciously, we have internalized the messages these negative depictions of curly hair have sent, and we have learned to be embarrassed and afraid to show our curls. In many shampoo commercials from the 1960s to the late 2010s, although curly hair shows up sporadically, by and large the hair of beauty advertisements is straight. An ad for Soft and Beautiful Hair Relaxer describes straight hair as soft, straight, and shiny. It's just better. In this ad for Prel Concentrate shampoo, the hair that's described as beautiful and desirable is long and barely wavy.
Sandy, what are you doing here? Just wanted Robert to see my beautiful hair.
Prel Concentrate, lots of lather.
For liquid Prel, similarly, the hair is described as
Glowing with the look of luxury.
Count how many people there are in the following commercial for Vidal Sassoon. Count how many have straight hair.
With silky, sexy,
shiny hair.
Make Vidal Sassoon shampoo part of your daily three-step plan for beautiful hair.
'Cause if you don't look good, we don't look good. We take pride in you. If you don't look good, we don't look
Notice anything? Every single person does. There are commercials, especially during the periods when curly hair sees an uptick, where curly hair is advertised. However, this doesn't contradict what we see here. In the following Escape shampoo commercial, there are definitely wild manes, but the scene depicted is a crazy party as opposed to any professional, calm, or composed setting. In Tony's commercials of the 80s, the jingle goes,
Curls are back, and Tony's got 'em, and you can get 'em any way you want 'em.
curls are desirable, but only if they're done, styled, and smoothed. In 80s Wella Balsam commercials, curly hair is displayed, but there's still an element of imperfection.
Try Wella Balsam shampoo and Wella Balsam conditioner. You'll turn problem hair into beautiful hair.
These commercials perpetuate the idea that natural hair, and curly hair in particular, is not good enough on its own. So, how did the media turn anti-curl? Why has the straight sensation swept the nation for so many years? As soon as African people were brought to the United States and enslaved, hair-based discrimination became a massive issue in American society. The American Legal Defense Fund even states, for decades, LDF has recognized natural hair discrimination as racism by another name. In ancient Africa, hair was a significant part of the culture. The way a person styled and adorned their hair could tell onlookers anything about them, from marital status to social standing. According to Lori Tharps, a professor of journalism at Temple University and co-author of Hair Story, Untangling the Roots of Black Hair in America, if a person's hair wasn't styled intricately, it was thought that that individual was mentally ill. After the transatlantic slave trade, however, enslaved people were forced by their masters to shave their heads, effectively dehumanizing them and severing their connections to the African continent and their heritage. White slave owners pointed to black hair, insinuating that it looked more animalistic than white hair, so it was inferior. Once it grew back, enslaved people had no way to take care of their hair as they had in Africa. They resorted to using household items like cooking grease, axle grease, and thread in an attempt to tame it, which perpetuated the stereotype that curly hair is dirty. Enslaved people were only allotted 1 day a week to do their hair. Sunday was the designated hair day, and that was the one block of time that enslaved people could set aside to do their hair. The rest of the week, they were forced to leave it alone. Although white Americans looked at black hair as something disgusting and dirty, an undertone of jealousy at its beauty arose as well. In 1786, New Orleans created a series of laws called the Tignon Laws, which prohibited black and Creole women from wearing their natural hair uncovered. These were enacted in the hopes of deterring white men from engaging with these women because their beauty was a threat to white women. Although many black and Creole women in New Orleans were free at this time, this law delineated them as the slave class. The women of New Orleans responded to these mandates by wearing beautiful and intricate headscarves, which are still worn by some black women to this day. After the 13th Amendment was passed in 1865, legally abolishing slavery, America began to push for the assimilation of black individuals into Eurocentric American society and culture. Aaron Lynch, a curator of an Afro-comb exhibition at the University of Cambridge's Fitzwilliam Museum, mentioned to BBC an appropriate nickname for the post-emancipation period, the Great Oppression. Black women felt obligated to assimilate as a means of survival. Survival was about fitting in, and although they couldn't change the color of their skin, they could change the texture of their hair. Jim Crow laws severely restricted African American ascent to the higher echelons of society, but assimilation made the abuse slightly more bearable. The first hair relaxer was invented in 1909 by Garrett Augustus Morgan. A relaxer did not gain popularity in black populations until Madam C.J. Walker's products took off in the late 1910s. Walker, a daughter of formerly enslaved people, was disappointed in the lack of products that existed to care for her hair. She developed a scalp ailment from lack of access to a shower. Her hair was damaged and falling out, and nothing she could afford helped, so she decided to take matters into her own hands. Walker discovered formulations for products that worked on her hair using ingredients from Africa, and decided to start a company to sell her products in 1906. She began going door to door, selling to black women and hosting demonstrations of her products in churches in the South and Southeast. By 1917, she had made $500,000 in revenue. Walker became the first female African American millionaire, giving jobs to thousands of other black women along the way. Malcolm X was a prominent figure in the civil rights movement who advocated for black empowerment as a leading spokesman of the Nation of Islam. Because of white people's historical oppression of black people, he argued that violence as an act of self-defense was the best way to defend and reclaim black power. He preached the separation of black and white Americans and criticized Martin Luther King Jr. and the mainstream civil rights movement for its emphasis on nonviolence and racial integration. In his autobiography, released posthumously following his assassination in February 1965, Malcolm discussed the subject of hair extensively. He described how he chemically processed his hair for the first time in 1941. He conked his hair, applying chemicals to it in order to straighten his curls. It was painful, and he almost had to wash off the chemicals before they had finished processing, but he was overjoyed to finally look more like a white man. He later regretted this decision. I had joined that multitude of Negro men and women in America who are brainwashed into believing that black people are inferior and white people superior, that they will even violate and mutilate their God-created bodies to try to look pretty by white standards. It makes you wonder if the Negro has completely lost his sense of identity, lost touch with himself. The relaxer trend lasted much longer than just Malcolm X's time. In the words of comedian Paul Mooney in Chris Rock's comedy documentary Good Hair, if your hair is relaxed, white people are relaxed. If your hair is nappy, they're not happy. Although relaxers are a nice commodity and, honestly, a means of survival after abolition, they are far from a best-case solution. Most relaxers contain sodium hydroxide, a chemical compound that damages proteins in the hair to alter their shape. It is incredibly dangerous. It can chemically burn users' skin, and fumes can damage their lungs. In the 1960s and 1970s, civil rights and Black Power movements emerged with full force. Black people began to reclaim hairstyles that they'd been prevented from wearing in the past. The Black Power movement entered the mainstream in 1966 and continued through the 1970s. The civil rights and Black Power movements were a catalyst that inspired Black people to embrace who they were, naturally, and to effectively rebel against the standards and norms they had been forced into for centuries. The afro in particular became a political symbol of a person's pride in their African heritage. Angela Davis, a member of the militant Black Panther movement, was a major influence in the popularization of the afro and inspired many Black people to wear theirs as a symbol of opposition. Afros are big, curly, fluffy, poofy, and exactly the opposite of what white Americans thought hair should look like. In 1972, a study done in St. Louis discovered that among Black teens, 40% of females and 90% of males wore their hair naturally, a major uptick from the generations before. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed, seemingly banning discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. However, these bases are all very much up for interpretation by individuals and courts. Therefore, appearance is not protected by this act. What this means is that although the Civil Rights Act and other anti-discrimination acts exist in the United States, for most of American history, no law existed to prevent hair-based racial discrimination, especially in the workplace. In 1976, the first natural hair discrimination case was brought to the Supreme Court. In the case of Jenkins v. Blue Cross Mutual Hospital Insurance, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit upheld a race discrimination lawsuit against an employer for bias against afros. The appeals court agreed that workers were entitled to wear afros under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Although afros were technically allowed in the workplace, pressure to assimilate became more dominant in the 80s and 90s, especially due to prevalent hair care ads in magazines and on TV. However, during this time, images of Black women, like Janet Jackson in Poetic Justice, also incited a rise in the popularity of protective styles like braids and cornrows. In the 1980s, the Black Power movement slowed down, and with it, Black people in America traded their afros and braids for relaxed hair, wigs, and weaves. However, the reduction in the prevalence of these styles made them all the more open to discrimination in the workplace. In 1981, Renee Rogers, an airport operations agent, brought her employer American Airlines to court after being discriminated against for wearing cornrows to work. In the case of Rogers versus American Airlines, the court ruled in favor of American Airlines, stating that the policy didn't violate the 13th Amendment because it was race neutral. The court rejected the idea that Rogers' braids were culturally significant and stated that American Airlines' policy had a negligible effect on employment because braids aren't an immutable characteristic, but rather one that can easily be changed. In the early 2000s, the natural hair movement experienced a resurgence. This revival, unlike the one in the 60s and 70s, was not tied to a political movement. This time, it was based on a social movement to redefine beauty standards for Black women, especially those who were tired of damaging their hair to fit the Eurocentric beauty standard prevalent in America. It remained difficult to bring natural hairstyles into the workplace, but a shift was beginning to occur. When millennials entered the workforce in the 2000s and 2010s, they brought an entirely new attitude towards the idea of professionalism. Generation X knew what they brought to the employer's table and were not afraid to threaten to quit their jobs in the face of discrimination or unfairness. Their assertiveness and embrace of societal changes began to move work culture into a less conventional place, which allowed the generation that followed to stand up for themselves against unfair employment practices. Generation X also entered the workforce with an okay boomer mentality. They rejected the baby boomer workhorse tradition and instead opted for comfort and work-life balance. To millennials, there is much more to life than just work. Millennials are tired of traditional and archaic structures and advise those that came before them to get with the times or get left behind. Because millennials are the first generation to grow up in the digital age, they are uniquely valuable assets to their employers. However, because they are aware of this value, they have a great ability to negotiate with employers for the rights and comforts they want and deserve. If the employer does not accommodate their millennial employees and these employees quit, their company will struggle to keep up in the digital age. In Good Hair, which came out in 2009, Rock interviewed high school-aged Black girls about their hair and professionalism. He asked them if they'd hire a woman who walked into their office with an afro. One girl replied,
If somebody came into my office with like an afro way out here and a suit, that just seems really out of place. It's like a contradiction, so I would kind of second guess.
Another hair discrimination case, EEOC versus Catastrophe Management Solutions, took place in 2016. Here, a black woman named Chastity Jones interviewed for a customer service representative position in Mobile, Alabama. She was dressed professionally and her hair was styled in locks for her interview. She originally was told that she got the job, but a manager then said that she could not be hired with locks and stated, "They tend to get messy, although I'm not saying yours are, but you know what I'm talking about." The company's policy stated that employee hairstyles should reflect a professional image, and locks were not included as professional. Jones refused to cut off her locks and was not given the position. In court, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission stated that prohibition of dreadlocks in the workplace constitutes race discrimination because dreadlocks are a manner of wearing the hair that is physiologically and culturally associated with people of African descent. The court again ruled in favor of the company, even 3 decades after Rogers versus American Airlines. Movements attempt to create change, and the world is a little slow on the uptake. But the pieces truly begin to fall into place when the law begins to change to benefit the people behind the movements. For hair-based discrimination, this impetus came in the form of the Crown Act, creating a respectful and open world for natural hair. The Crown Act is a piece of legislation that makes hair-based discrimination illegal. However, the act is only upheld at the state level, and as of 2023, there is no equivalent at the federal level. As I write this, 20 states have passed the Crown Act or similar legislation. The Crown Act was first passed in California on July 3, 2019, around 15 years after the country first started seeing a shift in sentiment towards black hair. So, what can we learn? The way the country views African American hair is a complex and historically rich dilemma. Our country is finally making its way towards acceptance, but there's still a long way to go.